Okay, great. Just want to say thank you all for joining us today. We're aware that this is a really busy time for everyone with the semester wrap-ups and holiday preparations. So we just appreciate you taking the time with us today. And so over the next hour, I'll provide a general overview of SEF as an organization, followed by some insights into the SELI Fellowship. And then we'll delve into a highlight of today's session where you'll be listening to one of our SELI alums so she can share more about her firsthand experience from this past summer. And then towards the end, we'll briefly just walk through the application process before opening it up for question and answers. One quick note about Q&A. There's a feature where you can ask questions throughout the presentation in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring it as they come in, and we'll either answer it directly or share the answer broadly if we think it'll be useful for the entire audience. If there aren't any immediate questions, we'll just go ahead and jump right on in. Yeah. So here's just a quick agenda for today. Just wanted to note that we are recording this webinar and we'll be sharing this out. So we do ask if you all could just keep yourselves on mute unless you have a question so we can minimize any background feedback. Okay, so before we jump into more about SELI, we think it's important to give you some information about SEF as an organization that really leads the fellowship. We're hoping most of you have done your research and this is a review, but for those who are just getting to know us as an organization, SEF was founded in 1867 in the wake of the Civil War to establish a system of public education for the newly emancipated population. But more importantly, as an effort to unite Northerners and Southerners, an effort to provide quality education for all people in the South, no matter the race. And so over a century and a half, we've been working on increasing access and opportunity for our most underserved student populations. And so today we continue this work by operating regionally in our 17-state footprint, which spans across the traditional American South, with a few additional states north of the Mason-Dixon line where Charleston is originated. Also, our mission aims to advance equitable education practices and policies in our 17 states, and we do that through government affairs and advocacy, research and policy, and leadership development where SELI is housed. And we hope that this results in racial equity, but we're moving towards an education justice framework, and this is really to ensure every student, regardless of background, can attain a high-quality education that propels them towards the opportunity-rich life. And more importantly, we operate through the entire education continuum. So early childhood education, K-12, of course, post-secondary, and some workforce development. And this is really important because our SELI fellows have the opportunity to be placed in any one of our partner organizations on a number of education issues that they're interested in. So SEF has a very long legacy of leadership development work that really spans 156 years. And through the majority of our existence, we've been dedicated to enhancing the capabilities of our promising leaders and empowering them to tackle challenges and spearhead the creation of equitable education systems for all children. And so an interesting historical fact, you'll find the image of W.E. Du Bois, which was SEF's very first fellow in 1903. And we played a pivotal role in supporting Du Bois as he undertook his groundbreaking work in the souls of Black folks. So again, it is very evident that leadership development is deeply ingrained in SEF's DNA. And this commitment remains really fundamental to the aspect of our mission today. So here you see what we characterize as SEF's approach or theory of change in developing leaders. We have adopted a double helix model for leadership development. And our view is that effective leadership development adopts a two-pronged approach. And the first strand, as you see, aims to strengthen individual and personal leadership and builds individuals' racial equity posture, a term that was SEF's Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Kenita Williams, coined. So I want to give her credit. But this helps really build the willingness and commitment to the competencies, knowledge, and dispositions for really exerting influence on impacting policy and education. And so we do this by trying to cultivate that unapologetic education leader to lead for equity in promoting the interests of all children. And so, as you can see, the other strand is building, as we do like build leadership moves, there's also a strand on influencing systems change. And this is really working with leaders and building their knowledge, their awareness and understanding about what is actually happening in their schools and the systems, and what is data saying about the nature and magnitude of disparities in the districts in the South. And some other things are like, what are the drivers? What are the high leverage areas that leaders should be focusing on around education justice? And so that's our approach to leadership development in a quick snapshot of SEF. So now I will transition to talking more about the SELI Fellowship, which is one of SEF's longest standing signature programs. And so the mission of SELI is to empower the next generation of innovators, thinkers, and leaders to become effective change agents in education. The program was developed in 2004 to mark the 50th anniversary of the United States Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education. And the belief was that there was still work that needed to be done for fulfilling the promise of Brown and ensuring all children, irrespective of race, and receive an excellent education. And so SEF thought, hey, we needed to build this pipeline, particularly in the South, of equity-oriented change agents. That is to say, like a new generation of thinkers, leaders with these big ideas and hearts that was needed to carry on Brown's work. And so that this generation must really be given the opportunities where they can grow academically and professionally and to create their skills and lead the work. And that was the creation of SELI. And so now we're going into the 20th year, so 20th anniversary, and SEF has provided nearly 285 students with an unparalleled leadership development opportunity to work on education issues throughout the South. And so through SELI, these young leaders are conducting research, policy analysis, advocacy, and organizing efforts across the region in our nonprofit, foundations, school districts, across our 110 partner organizations. And the next slide gives you kind of like a glimpse into the types of placements. And so just at a high level, we pair students with the placements based on the student's ability, skill, education interests, as well as the need for the capacity of the organization based on their work plan, because they do submit an application, the host site. And this is meant to provide fellows with a meaningful work experience. And as you can see, this is our last year's cohort. So again, here are some examples of the placement sites. SEF places college undergrads, graduate, and doctoral professional students in an 8-week paid summer fellowship in school districts, state agencies, institutions of higher education, nonprofits in the summer, where they get this firsthand experience on working on an education issue and also help build that capacity of our partner organizations. And so last summer, we had fellows at Georgia Budget Policy Institute, UNCF, School District, Hamilton County Public Schools in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And as you can see through this arrow, they work across a number of issues. So early childhood, advancing public education, also known as K-12, college access, and social justice. And again, we get a lot of questions about how placements are done. And there's a number of things that go into the placement formula, but I'd say at a high level, it's really based on the fellow's interests, their current skill set, and most importantly, our current slate of partner host sites, because they do submit an application, and what types of skills and supports the organization needs that summer. And lastly, because it is a paid fellowship that brings a lot of talented young leaders, I will say like our fellows are highly coveted. And so we see SELI as an opportunity to really help build that talent pipeline of leaders that have an orientation for social justice early on in their career. And we also see it as an opportunity to stop the brain drain in the South and expose young leaders with various career opportunities in education. And we also see this opportunity to really expose emerging leaders to the breadth of career opportunities in education so we can attract more talent into this field. So here's a little bit about program logistics. This is not exhaustive, but highlights some of our major components. Again, fellows are placed with their partner organizations based on the proposed projects and the fellow skills and education issues. So for 8 weeks, you'll be at your fellowship from May 20th to July 12th, and all fellows are to work full-time, 40 hours a week with their placement sites. And the goal is to work through the work plan that was presented by the partner, as well as you. And projects can include a number of things. So like research, white papers, data collection, helping prepare a legislative session. It could be, to be honest, anything. And so quick note, we are clear that fellows are not really bogged down to administrative tasks during the summer. So like making copy or running copies. That is not the goal of this fellowship at all. And our partners do honor this, but we always say like no one is above an administrative task. So that could be an ask, but that is not your work plan. And so in addition to the 8 weeks, we bring fellows for an orientation to kick off the fellowship. And this really serves as kind of like a primer for the summer. So we'll expose you to social justice issues in education, hear from policymakers, thought leaders, advocates who are really doing this work. And you'll leave orientation and go directly to your placement sites. And orientation is tentatively in Atlanta from May 15th to the 17th. And then at the end of your summer fellowship, you'll come back to Atlanta for a closing meeting, and you'll share your lessons learned, reflect on your summer experience, and this will be held July 17th to the 19th. And something really important to know is that attendance for both opening and closing is required, and that's really a non-negotiable to remain eligible for the fellowship. And one thing to also note is SEF will cover and arrange your travel expenses associated with traveling to and from orientation and closing, and then to your placement site. And so, as I mentioned, SELI is a paid fellowship. Both undergrads and graduate students get $5,000. And while we do cover travel expenses, you are, or the student is responsible for covering housing costs. But I will say our partner sites are required to identify low-cost housing options for fellows, so it's not a huge lift for you of finding housing. So now I'll just talk about eligibility, and these are general because we do make exceptions on a case-by-case basis, but these are just some guidelines that we adhere to. And so one big thing, SELI's for students. You must be a student and should be enrolled in an undergraduate or graduate program. That could be master's, a doctoral program, law school. And sometimes we do have recent graduates that do apply on a case-by-case basis. So we don't want you not to apply because of graduation, but generally those recent grads have interest in pursuing their education. But if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to us. And because SELI is for emerging leaders, students generally fall in between the ages of 20 and 35. But I would say the most important thing is the hours of completion. You must be equivalent of a junior in college by the time your fellowship placements begin. So that's May 20th. And so we accept all majors, but we do prefer majors that are, related to social justice, education policy and practice. But generally we accept all majors. Another thing to mention is writing is critical and being able to think critically. So the application really tries to probe with these questions and video responses, I would say. So please just be thoughtful in how you're writing and what you're trying to convey, because we really do look at it and read those responses, and our selection committee does as well. Also in the application, you must be having the willingness to relocate to another location for summer 2024. Though it may not be necessary, it may be required for placement sites. Another thing I'd like to say is that a big thing with the SELI Fellowship is that we ask, students not to take on other jobs or commitments because SELI is a full-time job, and fellows are required to work 40 hours a week and must be committed to that work of that placement site. So we just ask not to take on any other commitments for the summer, and that's in the interest of you and your work plate. And then lastly, I'll speak more about this at the end, but just please submit all your materials by February 1st, and I'll talk more about how that looks. Okay, so now we are going to move into what I think is the most important part of the webinar, and you're going to hear from one of our alumni on their experience, and she's going to just share more about herself. So first I want to say that we did have someone another SELI alum who was going to speak, but last minute they were unable to make it, unfortunately. But I will put his email in the chat box if you have any questions. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. You'll hear from Madison Adcock, who was a 2023 SELI Fellow and was placed at Sheltering Arms. And before I pass it on, I just wanted to let you all know that we'll open up the floor after she speaks on a couple of questions. However, again, we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so feel free to hold your questions until then as well. And I'll continue to monitor that. So now I'm going to stop my share, and then Madison's going to share her screen.
Okay, thank you. Let me pull this up. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Madison. I'm just going to share a little bit about me and my experience. So I will breeze through this. So I went to Kennesaw State University, where I got my bachelor's in integrative studies with a certificate in leadership. And then I went to Georgia State University and I got my master's in educational research with a focus in quantitative methods. So I graduated last May and then jumped straight into the fellowship. So it was a great opportunity for me to initially understand what the workforce was going to be like for me with a master's in research. So the hopes that I had for my fellowship, I really was hoping to connect and network with like-minded people outside of my institution. I tend to be very in my shell, in my personal little safe space. So it was really a big deal for me to get out there and meet new people that were willing to question my thoughts, could really just get deep down in my brain and better understand all of the things that we were trying to figure out during our fellowship. Additionally, I was really hoping to better understand the impact of educational equity outside of the classroom. I felt like I did a lot of understanding inside the classroom, but there's so much that goes on outside of it. So I was really hoping to get a little bit more of the business side of things through my fellowship. Which is what my next point is. And then lastly, I wanted to tighten some skills that I already had and then continue to develop those in my workforce. So my placement site, I was at Sheltering Arms, and this logo is a little bit old. We just celebrated 135 years. I worked with the HR department. I conducted a lot of research about engagement with employees, what the turnover rates looked like. I wrote some detailed reports that went to the executive staff and was presented to the board. So a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of groundwork, getting to know all of the employees. One of the major projects that I did was a climate study, which was going to one of our Sheltering Arms facilities, and we have 13, to better understand any of the issues that they were facing, whether that's technology in our classrooms, managerial issues, just anything that we could do as an HR team to better understand and support our teachers. So that was really big. And then writing that report for the executive leadership team. I did forget to mention we are an early childhood educational facility. So some lessons that I learned, it's difficult to decide one singular lesson because it's 8 weeks of consistent learning. But for me, my work plan was a lot about research and developing studies, and I kind of jumped in where I saw a need. So my work plan did get edited or shifted a little bit throughout the summer. But I saw a lot of issues with early childhood education teachers and inequitable pay and a lot of discrepancies just on how we can support our teachers. So while it was still education related, it was more so focused on the teacher side instead of the student side. So I did a lot of research on equitable education for teachers, whether that's workforce development, paying people more, things like that. So that was one of the lessons learned, is that we have to make a change in early childhood for our teachers. And then right here, I just wrote a little point about specifically women of color have been the backbone of early childhood education for more years than we can even count. And without them, society truly would not be able to function. Moms and dads could not go to work if it were not for these facilities. So why is it so impossible to pay them what they're worth? So specifically in my field experience, as I did mention, writing and being able to communicate effectively, and I considered myself to be a skilled writer. I had just finished working on my thesis and submitting it. Everything was approved. I was so excited. However, I had only written things in an academic setting in academia. And most times those are people who are looking for your information, what you already have, rather than having to write for people that don't want to hear the information or don't have any type of background knowledge on that information. So I'll say that writing for any type of audience very quickly became what I was good at, where I had no choice but to learn the most throughout my fellowship. And then lessons learned with the peers. I think that this was a really special group. Asley knows more. She's seen a lot more. But what was really special was all of us ended up having imposter syndrome, but not really wanting to talk about it because, you might be sitting next to somebody who's getting a PhD in education. You might be sitting next to somebody who just reached their junior level of college. And so all of us felt this need of trying to fit in and trying to belong. And as soon as we opened that can of worms, it was just the most incredible group of people to lean on. And we still lean on each other to this day. We've got a group chat. There were a group of us that went to Southern Education Foundation's last issues forum. So truthfully, for me, the biggest lesson learned from my peers is finding your people and being able to lean on them. And then my perspective through my fellowship, it truthfully changed my career trajectory. My entire thesis was written specific to immigrant students and children of immigrants and their likelihood to obtain a college education. And I am currently sitting in an early childhood education facility where I swore to myself I was hands off. This is not what I want to do. But I wrote here, the first 1,000 days of a child's life is where they learn the most. They go from being protected in this little womb to being thrown out into the world and having to open milk cartons for themselves, open zippers, just so many things happen in the first 1,000 days. So I very quickly learned that although I specifically wrote and learned a lot about impacting college education for these people, it starts with early childhood education. If you can receive a high quality and equitable early childhood, your chances to obtain a 4-year college degree or more is it's so much higher. It's going to change your life to have a great early childhood education. So that's my perspective, and that's my slideshow.
Thank you, Madison.
So I will
Um,
stop sharing my screen.
yeah.
Okay.
And we can open it up for 1 or 2 questions and then talk about the application. And then if you have any more questions for Madison as well, but any high level questions? Well, Madison, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So why would you encourage someone to apply to SELI?
I think for me, one thing is that I thought I was never going to be in early childhood, and here I am today still sitting in a shelter in arms facility. It I mean, it really did change what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I had everything figured out until I met this group of fellows and until I was really exposed to all of the moving parts. It's changed my life, and it's changed my life for the better. I am so much more aware of all of the moving parts. And also I think just having more people to connect to, having networking opportunities, all of that is a reason and then more of why people should apply to be a SELI fellow.
And we did not pay her to say that, y'all. Okay, I'll talk about the application really quick and then we'll open it up for questions for anything. And also for Madison. It's height. Right, not all the way. Okay, so applications are now open, and I'm just going to run through what it consists of. And so the application form, which is also a Google form, is just some preliminary questions on demographics, your interests, goals, and this really helps with the matching process. And that's kind of like the first step. Second is submitting a current resume. And we particularly use the resume to send to your potential host site so they're able to get a snapshot of your journey to date, whether that's, your extracurriculars or your career. So that's really helpful. Transcripts, unofficial transcripts are okay to send, but please just make sure it's from all institutions attended. We also have no minimum GPA required, but we ask that you do demonstrate interest in education, social justice, policy, um, and also for letters of recommendation, we ask 1 to 2, and we're leaving that up to the discretion of the applicant. Your application may only need 1, but 2 may also be encouraged. And also, one thing that I want to highlight is just please make sure your recommender is someone professional to speak to who you are and how you'll be a value add to the fellowship. Oftentimes, letter of recommendations make or break an application, so just please be thoughtful on who you ask. Um, we also have some short answer responses, and again, just being thoughtful about your professional writing and what you want to convey. And then lastly, we have a video response, and this is just an opportunity for the selection committee to just get to know you outside of your written materials. Really, just like show some personality. It's like less than 2 minutes, so of just asking or answering one of the 2 questions. And so there is if you go on our website, you can look at the application overview and instructions that highlights everything and more about what goes into the application. And that is due on February 1st at 5 p.m. Eastern. And again, you can reach out to us if you have any questions at all. And this next slide just has my email. And you can use email as well if you have any questions, but feel free to reach out to me. And I'll just hold that for a little bit. And next, we can open the floor for Q&A. And so feel free to use the raise hand function or drop the questions in the chat for everyone. And yeah, I'm going to stop the share.
There's one question for Madison in the chat. How did you navigate the application process? Any advice?
Yes. Oddly enough, all of y'all are already in a better place than I was. I did not find out about the SELI fellowship until approximately 3 days before the due date. So I want you to picture me in my living room taking like 15 different short video answers and hating all of them and the lighting and everything. So already you're in a much better place than me. When it comes to the actual application process, all of it online is super easy. You know, most of you are probably in some sort of policy background in education. An educational degree is something that you're pursuing. At the end of the day, all of us have been through education. We've gone through the K through 12 school system. You're in college at this point. All of these personal experiences that you've gone through need to inspire what you intend to write and how you want to impact any type of educational equity. I hope that answers your question well.
Good. There's another question.
Yes.
Madison, you mentioned that you tend to be a little bit more to yourself, and I do as well. How do you find ways to to initiate at your placement site and network?
That's an incredible question. I want everybody to know that right now I am shaking because this is just not my forte. This is not what I like to do. I love to do some research and write a paper for you. So for me, I kind of saw a need and I didn't ask. I kind of went with ask for forgiveness rather than permission, where I kind of just started doing some research on my own about equity for teachers. And like one thing that I've really been focusing on the past couple of months is launching a way to give teachers some discounted tuition for the children that attend Sheltering Arms. That's something that other places that are for profit can easily offer. It's really difficult to navigate in the nonprofit sector. So I just kind of did my own research on it and sent an email to my manager at the time and said, hey, this is what I've been looking into. Do you mind sitting down with me so we can talk through this for a few minutes? And that opened more doors than I ever thought possible. So I would say for people who like to be a little bit more to themselves, when you want to make a suggestion, come with a few options, if that makes sense. Don't come empty-handed, basically. Okay, I'm reading the next question from Parker. I think you discuss your relationship with the SELI cohort. How did that develop? Okay, so this is funny. Opening meeting is 3 days and closing meeting is also 3 days. And I do remember on the opening day, I was like, I feel like I've known everybody here for weeks, and like all of us almost got teary-eyed having to leave because, you know, we're not all in Atlanta anymore. People are going off to Texas or Chattanooga, Tennessee, or wherever their placement sites were. It was so hard for us to be separated. It kind of felt like a baby deer trying to walk for the first time, all of us separately, texting each other, making sure, checking in on everybody, making sure everybody is enjoying their placement sites, offering any type of assistance that we can. And that was without anybody else being involved. That was not a required Zoom meeting that we had to be a part of. That was all of us choosing to be there to support each other. And yes, we did meet, I want to say 3 or 4 times throughout the fellowship over Zoom as a group. How is my post-fellowship life experience? It's great. So after my fellowship, Norman is my chief people officer, so he is my direct manager. I wrote a very well-worded email proposing some of the things that I could help at Sheltering Arms, things that I could make more efficient and better. And so because of that, I am still here today, literally physically at Sheltering Arms. So it's great. I love it. I never want to leave. Me with this. Oh, Asley, you have a question now.
Yes. So I'll just read it. Related to the question above, how large of a cohort are you expecting for the 2024 year? And has cohort size impacted the experience for fellows in the past?
Do you want me to weigh in on that,
Yeah.
Ashley?
Mhm.
Okay. So it just varies. It varies based on resources because SCF pays for the fellowship. It varies based on the need, the number of applications we get from placement sites. It varies on the number of applications. It's a very competitive process, though. We get nearly 200 applications each year, and we try to at most take about 15 to 20, but I think we are slowly learning that the sweet spot is closer to about a 10 to 12. It just allows us to get a more catered experience to the smaller cohort. So short answer is we don't have an answer. It will depend on the applications from both the placement sites and the fellows and the resources for the budget. But there will not ever be more than 20, not ever be less than 10.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you. Great question.
Madison, there's a question for you. What approach did you take to making sure you had 40 hours and not having any interferences?
Okay. So one thing about this fellowship is that Dr. Kanita will absolutely speak about it later. We were all required to be in person. So that was one really easy way to make sure that you're hitting these 40 hours is physically being in an office. And even in a hybrid setting, you get so caught up in all of the things that you are doing that 40 hours passes like that. So it's not difficult by any means to hit that 40 hours, especially when you start developing relationships with the people that you are working with and not having any interferences. Honestly, it's a 9 to 5. You make yourself devoted to what you're doing that 9 to 5. And you always have a lunch break. You're always going to pick up your phone every once in a while to send that text message to mom. But other than that, it's a 9 to 5. You're busy, you're at work. And then as soon as that clock hits 5:01 or whatever you and your placement site decide, you're done.
Yeah. Thanks, Madison. I was gonna say it's a full-time job. So you will be expected to work full-time hours. And that may vary, sometimes even for, like I said, SCF, we were at a forum that we just did and we were working into evenings. So that meant like we didn't work the next Monday after. You may have some situations like that, but you're expected to work full-time hours. And that's why also part of the requirement is that you not take any other jobs, any other courses. And some situations, some people think, oh, if I have this job in the day, I can take a night course. Sometimes you may have evening events at your work. You need to be available for your job. And part of that is also your placement site ensuring they are giving you a full work plan. So the onus is on them to actually provide you with meaningful work as well.
Yes, and I also wanted to add, we have check-ins with both the fellows and the host sites, just to check in to see like how you all are doing and how the workload is, and also with the partner sites, just to make sure it's a mutually beneficial like relationship during the summer. We want to make sure both of you all are learning, but also learning from each other and how the summer fellowship is going. So there's a lot of touch points throughout the summer with us, with your partner sites or your host site, and as well as with the cohort as well. And are the majority of the placement sites in person, hybrid, or is it still to be determined? So yeah, just like Dr. Williams said, it depends on the slate of our host sites because they submit an application. And so we also try to meaningfully place you with within the work plan from your application. So right now, like we can't answer that, but yeah, that is something that happens all simultaneously. Thank you. And Madison, I'm not sure if you wanted to speak to, you also were one of the Jenny Looney Servant Leader Award winners, which is based on award granted to an exceptional SELI fellow who demonstrated excellence in attendance, achievement, performance, in service, and during their summer fellowship. So she, as well as Daquan, who was unable to be here, won that award. And so would you just like high level speak to that?
Sure. I think when it comes to attendance, I'm a very timely person, and Sheltering Arms hosts monthly job fairs typically. Sometimes it's during the week, but the one that we had been planning for during my fellowship ended on a Saturday. And so, I mean, I was there from 6 a.m. until 3 p.m. on a Saturday, and then that next Wednesday was closing. So, I mean, it was after the fellowship was over. But in my head, in my heart, I was already so attached to this that there was no way I was going to leave it. So I think that was a big part of it. When it came to the actual presentation, I think that I took more of a historical approach where I talked about kind of why Sheltering Arms was so important here, and the history behind Atlanta and where we are and all of our center locations and redlining. So I think that's, as well as my recommendation letter, is what did well.
Yes, I will say the host site submits a recommendation letter, and you also submitted like a self recommendation. And yeah, that really was a testament to the hard work that you did for sure. I had a question that was sent privately, but just do you think, how do you stand out in the application process, or how do you think you stood out, Madison? And then I can speak to it. Or
I think I made mine really personal. I remember talking a lot about my, at the time, boyfriend, who's now my fiance, being from Brazil, and how different our educational background was growing up. So he moved here when he was 7, and from there he went to a school in South Florida that was K through 12 on the same campus. And they shared it with a community college. And so he, as an 8-year-old, was sharing a campus with a 21-year-old. And their school was something like 80% free and reduced lunch, whereas I grew up in a place that was less than 1% free and reduced lunch. So I was just really personal and really honest about how my eyes had been opened so much over the last 5 years, and that I wanted to make an impact on equity, because equitable education, because I grew up in a place where it was a right rather than a privilege.
I love that. Definitely passion, direct experience. And I'm gonna let Dr. Williams speak because I know what she's gonna say about standing out.
What am I going to say about standing out, Ashley? You stand out by submitting a solid, clean application as well. Like, proofread your application materials. Don't submit applications with errors. You'd be surprised how often that happens. Don't actually put thought into the questions, answer the questions, the prompts that are being asked. And write good writing. Like, I pay attention to the writing. I teach dissertation writing, so I really do pay attention to the writing. So no pressure there, but give it your best shot. And really, I would say, people, I think Ashley spoke about it earlier, really be thoughtful about who you ask to do your letters of recommendation. Those, we pay attention to those. You don't want someone to just give you a generic recommendation and can't talk about like you and your work and the value add that you bring to the cohort. You want them to really be able to highlight why you would be a good asset to the program. Is that what you're expecting?
Yes, writing and everything else. Just a pristine application, I'd say. But yeah, if there's no further questions, thank you all for joining us, and we really look forward to receiving your application.
There was another question. I don't know if I may have missed it. Did we talk about whether placements are in person or hybrid? Did you see that question? Okay, sorry, I just missed it. Okay.
All good. But yeah, no, we'll stay on if you have any other questions for us. But thank you, Madison, for speaking and sharing your experiences. And we appreciate everyone for joining us today on this Thursday. Happy holidays, and we look forward